promise her she wasn't with it, but there's times that she's very good. You know, and she goes in and out.
The last time I was there, she's okay. And I realized that
and sometimes she can't even get words out.
no, sometimes I just scramble. The last time I wasn't bad, she did something that she did very consciously. Eating salad, and I put my fork down and
Oh, great to see you. Good to see you too. Oscar. Delighted to be here. Yeah, I was seeing someone.
Can't do it.
We'll notice. She'll be on the hand. Oh my God. God bless you.
Right over the head.
So that's tough. Have you been to some of the other things?
oh, thousands.
I can imagine. No, but I mean, of this series, of this festival. No, I need.
That's good advice.
Oh, of the Asian Society.
Good evening, everyone. I know some people are trickling in. We have a webcast audience that needs to, we try to start roughly on time. So welcome to you all. I'm Tom Nagorski. I'm the Executive Vice President here at the Asia Society. Welcome to a very special occasion and a longstanding tradition, the Asia Society President's Forum series here. It's a signature event for us, and we have a very special guest tonight. And on the subject of special guests, just a quick mention for some special guests of ours with the Society, members of our trustee family who are here tonight, Ann Ehrenkrantz and Joel Ehrenkrantz, welcome to you. Susan Hakaranen, one of our new trustees, welcome to you. Oscar Tang and the co-chair of our Global Council on Asian Arts and Culture, Dr. Agnes Shutang, is here with us. Cindy Whitehead, welcome to you. And a special welcome, where is Cynthia Polsky? Right here. Cynthia Hazen-Polsky, great supporter of the President's Forum series for many years now. We thank you especially this evening, Cynthia. Thank you. And welcome also to past Asia Society presidents. We have two of them, Bob Oxnam and Vishaka Desai in the second row here. Welcome to you. It is the President's Forum, so appropriate and great that you're with us. Just some really brief program notes from me tonight before we get started. A pair of major policy events here at the Asia Society in New York next week. On the 24th, next Wednesday, a special session on democracy and democratic reforms in Asia. The day after that, the 25th, we tackle a timely question on China and North Korea. Precisely what can the Chinese do, or what will the Chinese do to influence the North Korea crisis? That program, Bitter Allies, China and North Korea, on the 25th, a week from tonight. And 2 weeks from tonight, February the 1st, we welcome another guest from the world of network news. Bob Woodruff will be here. You may know Bob from a series of recent reports for ABC News from North Korea, also on the Rohingya crisis, from Myanmar and Bangladesh. And if you know his story at all, you know it's a miracle that Bob is even alive, given that a bomb nearly took his life in Iraq about a decade ago. So Bob Woodruff's remarkable journey, that is here on February the 1st. As for tonight, the President's Forum, really all you need to know, it follows a very basic format and formula. Once or twice a year, the sitting president of the Society takes the stage with a distinguished guest, and those guests come from a range of backgrounds reflecting the diversity of the Asia Society itself. The discussions tend to stretch beyond the pressing matters of the day to deeper conversations about ideas, about leadership, about life lessons, and I can assure you that all will be covered tonight. The long roster of President's Forum, and don't worry, I won't go through them all, President's Forum guests is impressive and eclectic, but to name just a few, we've had UN Secretaries General here, 3 of them by our count, Prime Ministers, Nobel laureates, we've had the Dalai Lama, Indra Nooyi, Maya Lin, Yo-Yo Ma, eclectic as I said, and in the first edition more than 3 decades ago, another giant in the world of media was here. The NBC News anchor at the time, John Chancellor, was our first guest at the President's Forum in conversation with then Asia Society President Bob Oxenham. I'd like to say we have the tape, but I don't think we do. So a reminder quickly that we webcast these events, and the Twitter hashtag is Asia Society Live. If you want to ask a question, you can use that hashtag, or you can send it via email at moderator@asiasociety.org. And to introduce our special guest tonight, please welcome another formidable figure, really formidable figure from the media world, journalist, editor, author, former editor of both the New Yorker and Vanity Fair magazines. Delighted to welcome back to the Asia Society, now the founder and head, of course, of Tina Brown Media. Please welcome Tina Brown.
Thank you. I'm really so delighted to be here to introduce our special guest tonight. Let me just say this. Lesley Stahl is a pioneer. She really is. She's an icon in our news profession. And in this moment, when the media in this country are under attack, and when elections and our electoral process are fraught with division and even allegations of foreign intrusion, we have with us a brilliant and tenacious reporter, a woman who can reflect personally on elections and election coverage, dating to her on-air work on election night in 1972, when the returns came in for Richard Nixon's landslide win for George McGovern. She truly has been in the room where it happened every single time. 1972 was also the year that Lesley Stahl became White House correspondent at CBS News, the first woman to hold that job. Her first big story, that was a little matter in Washington known as Watergate. She's covered every American president since Nixon, all 9 of them, right up to the moment in November 2016 when she landed her first interview with President Trump. Longevity in the media world is one thing, but our guest tonight has a long career marked at every turn with distinction. Anchor of Face the Nation, the first and still only woman to hold that job. Correspondent for 60 Minutes for 26 years and going strong. She's interviewed American presidents, foreign leaders, educators, entertainers, leaders in business, leaders in culture. She's reported from summit meetings and war zones, from Baghdad and Bucharest and Beijing, all over the world, really, and sometimes to places no reporters have been. In 2013, she gained unprecedented access to the U.S. prison facilities at Guantanamo Bay. At every turn, her work has had remarkable reach and impact. She's won 12 Emmy Awards and several honors for lifetime achievement in journalism. Her first Emmy was for a report of the 1983 Marine barracks bombing in Beirut, the most recent for a 2015 piece on how police recruit vulnerable young people for dangerous jobs as confidential informants. She's the author of 2 books, Reporting Live, and more recently a book about a different kind of big story in her life, one that really lights her up at every turn, Becoming Grandma, The Joys and Science of the New Grandparenting. She's a real, I can't tell you how grandparenting has changed Lesley Stahl, but anyway, it's another story. So that's the abridged introduction. Suffice to say, she's really not only done it all, she's done it with excellence. Our moderator tonight is Josette Sheeran, an impressive woman in her own right, president of the Asia Society, who also served as head of the UN World Food Programme. But as Tom said tonight, it's a special event because of the special guest who comes next. So I'm really delighted to welcome you to the Asia Society President's Forum and to ask you that you all welcome the mighty Lesley Stahl and Josette Sheeran.
Hi, everyone. Friends, new friends.
So, do you know how intimidating it is to interview Lesley Stahl?
Do you know how intimidating it is to be interviewed?
I know you're not used to this. So, why Lesley now? Let me just say there's kind of 3 things that came together to say this was the moment to really have this conversation, not only about all the things she's done, but her life and what moves her. And there's a lot of that in this book. So first, it's the 50th anniversary of 60 Minutes. I mean, this was a pioneering news program.
Can I start by saying I wasn't there in the beginning?
But almost in the beginning. But you really are by far the most influential and prominent woman who's been associated with the show. And there's a lot to discuss on that. Secondly, this book came out. If you haven't read it, it's really a great read. You're so frank, you're so honest, you're so self-revealing, and I think it
didn't mean to be.
I enjoyed it a lot. We'll talk about that. But also, all this started at a little lunch Cynthia Whitehead put together. And Cynthia, of course, John Whitehead was our former chair, but we were talking about Asia and China, and Lesley mentioned or brought up that she had gone to China in 1974 with her father. She told the story. That was early. This is just 2 years after Nixon goes to China, is greeted. I think we have another former president of the Asia Society here who greeted him at the tarmac when he came. It was a U.S. diplomat there. Nick Platt, are you here? I know he's on his way. But the story Lesley told, I said, I have to do a forum with you. So I think we'll open with that. If we could just go to the next slide. I was not able to extract a baby picture from her, but she said she was born on her 30th birthday, so we're going to do pre-30 for a minute here. And maybe start with a story about your dad.
I'd love to tell the story about that. We didn't even have an ambassador yet. We had David Bruce, and I think his title was something like intersection head, but he was our senior diplomat. His wife, I think her name was Ernestine, I saw her on the street in an orange leather jacket, standing about 5 feet over the average Chinese person walking down the street. I went there at the height of the Cultural Revolution. There were women's voices screeching in the streets 24 hours a day. And what I was told they were screeching, they were reading the Little Red Book. They were reading statements from the Little Red Book, round the clock. We met a man who was our guide. They didn't have any tourism. So they found this French speaker and made him our guide. And thank goodness my brother spoke French. But we got very close to him. And one day he burst into tears and told us in French that they had taken his 2 sons away from him and, as he said, flung them across the country and made them work at a work camp or a farm. And he was hoping they were going to be doctors and lawyers and whatever. It was heartbreaking. But the story that I told Josette that I want to tell you was that my father went on a business trip. He made leather colors. And at that time, he was the only maker of colors for pig hide. And China didn't have cattle, but they had a lot of pigs. So Mao Zedong had declared that in the next 5-year plan, they were going to develop a shoe industry out of hush puppies. We call them hush puppies, out of pig hide. And they needed colors. And so they invited my father over in 1974 to make a presentation so that he could sell his finish all over the country of China. My father loved it. Every country he'd ever been in, except the Soviet Union, he had to go to every single separate factory. In China, you just spoke to a group of people, and then you could sell to the entire country. So he goes to these meetings, and there's a table filled with people. He's making his pitch, and they're all dressed exactly alike. They all have the same haircut. Everything about them is identical. He couldn't decide whose face to look at. And by the way, there were people from all over the country, and they have, at that point in '74, so many different languages that almost every person had his own interpreter. So whatever was being said had to be interpreted into Mandarin and then into English for my father. So he's really struggling because he always knew who to direct his conversation to. But he had these meetings over 5 days, and he figured out by what they were wearing who the boss was and who the underling was. For example, a watch, that was the boss. Leather shoes was the boss. And he figured out there was absolutely a hierarchy, as there is in any society, and he figured out. But the story was that they did buy my father's finish. They call it finish. But they would only give him, I think it was a 7-year contract, which was the biggest sale he ever made in his whole life, but only 7 years, after which he had to agree to give them the formula. And in the interim, they had to teach them how to do it. They had to send people and teach them, not only give them the formula, but teach them how to make it. And that was the way they were operating back then. They were taking all our technology, and in my father's case, they bought it, and using it by forcing giving American businessmen or European contracts that was so irresistible that they were giving our technology away. They took us to a farm, and there was a giant shed they took us into, enormous shed, and on one side of the shed there was a tractor, and on the other side of the shed another identical tractor, bought or stolen somewhere from the West. Every single part was laid out. They had taken the tractor apart, piece by piece by piece. And they were making identical parts by hand, and they were going to build themselves a second tractor. And then they were going to build themselves a third tractor. And that was how they got their technology. The idea that they would take Western technology in any way they could get it was Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong. This goes back. This goes back to the beginning. And they're still doing it, and they're stealing it, or they're buying it, or they're forcing Americans to give them the technology. GE had to teach them how to make plane engines. Same story as my father. I don't know how many years later, 74 to now. So it goes all of the way they operate in the business world is Mao Zedong.
And you've done more on Asia and China, including covering Deng Xiaoping's trip, which really normalized relations under President Carter. We're going to get into that. We're going to go a little chronologically here. I'm confused how the budding zoologist becomes what you're called in this great new book on 60 Minutes and its history called 50 Years of 60 Minutes. She's called the relentless one on the team. How does a budding zoologist become a relentless journalist?
Well, after college, I went to Columbia to take the necessary science courses that I hadn't taken in college. And one of my courses was comparative anatomy. And I would go to comparative anatomy wearing gloves. And they wanted us to touch things like sheep's hearts and dogfish sharks, and I just wouldn't touch. And finally, the lab
This
assistant...
is a problem to be a zoologist.
Precisely.
Yes.
Precisely. I actually wanted to go to medical school. And the lab guy said, Miss Stahl, if you won't take those gloves off, you're never going to be a doctor. So I quit. I quit, and I answered an ad in the New York Times and went to work for Mayor Lindsay.
Oh.
His speechwriter had put an ad in the New York Times for a researcher.
Interesting.
And I got that job. Yeah.
You know, I feel like I need like 6 hours to go through all of this. In the book on becoming grandma, you're quite, I thought, honest and open about your relationship with your mother, not always being sunshine, not always being easy. Dolly?
Dolly.
Oh, yeah, because it was Dolly and
Lolly.
Lollipop. Yeah, yes, okay. Could you talk a little bit about that? And we've talked a little bit about your father, but she sounded like quite a force. Yes.
My mother was a force. My mother had 3 separate lives, completely different. She changed twice in her life. She was very sociable and very funny and exuberant until she was about 40, when she became a recluse and buried herself at home, became antisocial. We don't know why. It
Where
just
was
happened.
this?
In
Where?
Swampscott, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And then when my father died, we got phase 3, in which she was the sweetest little old lady, which none of us thought was ever going to happen in a million years, but she was the sweetest, and became the best grandmother who ever lived. But she was difficult all through it, except at the last phase.
So if I ask you about a defining experience in your life, your pre-30th life, that you think really had an influence on who you are today and who you became after that, what comes to mind?
Well, I've never been able to figure out the influence of my parents, the influence of my friends, influence of things I've read. It all gets complicated. I don't know how I got my values. I can't figure it out.
But they're there.
They're there, but I don't know where they came from. Nothing was ever pounded into me, and I can't. I want to blame my mother for everything, like a lot of us, and I often do. But I know that that's not fair and not true. I've had to learn that. So I can't answer. I think we're born, by the way, with tenacity. I think that's one of the things in a gene somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
So maybe we could go to the next slide. So
That's Watergate.
so in your book, Reporting Live,
There's Carl Bernstein.
Yeah.
You see him over there.
you describe many of these things. What struck me is you were hired by CBS News in their Washington bureau, and 3 weeks later they assign you to what was considered a mundane story to go cover a burglary in an office building. So you're 3 weeks on the job,
Exactly.
big time Washington, well, a newbie Washington reporter. And can I just quote TV Guide here? At the time, TV Guide called you, quote, a watchdog with perhaps a streak of pit bull in her ancestry. So you kind of launched your reputation then, but could you talk about that? There aren't many women in that picture that I see.
No, there weren't many women around. It was 72, so it was the height of the presidential campaign. And the CBS Washington bureau was empty because if a reporter didn't have a beat, wasn't covering the White House or the Pentagon, because there weren't many women, he was assigned to one of the candidates. And there were a lot of candidates in 72, and this was still the primary season. So there was nobody to send out to this, what they thought was a local break-in and entering at the Watergate. And they sent me, and I covered all the early court proceedings, the arraignment and so forth. And I was very enthusiastic about this story, and I kept running to phone payphones, because that's what you did in those days, no cell phone. I had to run to a payphone. And I would say, I have a radio report, and I had a breath from running, and I'd report what happened in the courtroom. For example, early on, they found that the burglars had $100 bills on them, all with consecutive numbers, and they had phony passports and things like that. I'm running out and recording online, and I found out 20 years later that not one of those reports was ever put on the air. Wow. So they were taking them in to humor me. The first arraignment that I covered, there was one other reporter in the room. There were just 2 reporters. That's how insignificant this story was thought to be in the very beginning. And he was a local reporter covering the Metro stories for the Washington Post. And the 2 of us are sitting there, the only 2 people really outside of the lawyers and everything. And he turned to me and he said, "Hi, my name's Bob Woodward. What's yours?" And he kept telling me, right almost from the beginning, "Don't let them take this story away from you.
Wow.
This is going to be something." He knew it, almost from day one. Well, once we found out that the burglars worked for CREEP, remember CREEP, the committee to re-elect the president, then it got interesting in the courtroom, but even our bosses wouldn't put it on radio, even then.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, somewhat in that era, White House Deputy Press Secretary Larry Speakes
This
was
is much
asked,
later.
This is much later, yes. So this is in the late 80s.
This is Reagan's press secretary.
This is Reagan's press secretary under President Reagan. Said, "You were the most tenacious reporter on the beat. I always thought she got where she was because she was blonde, attractive, and female." Is that just a quote from another era, or did you find you were dealing with that a lot? Because
No, I didn't find I was dealing with that a lot. I think I put blinders on. I ignored it. It didn't happen. It wasn't going to happen. Meaning that I wasn't going to be a sex object. I wasn't going to allow them to turn me into that. I was going to go get the story. And when you're a reporter, you know, it's the product people see. It's your work. It's what comes out at the end of the day. And I knew that if anyone I covered or if anyone I worked with wanted to make that an issue, it had nothing to do with the product, which was all I cared about.
Mm-hmm. So
I was never going to say to myself, ever, if I got something that turned out to be great, it was because I was a woman, or if I was set back, it was because I was a woman. I made a decision. I'm not going to ever think that way.
So in those early days, what do you think were the skills you brought to the job? You've talked about how to be successful, there's many things that you need to be able to do that. You have to be able to research, you have to be able to build the contacts and the trust and all of that. Do you feel you were able to build the trust to go from this early assignment to really put yourself on the map in that way?
CBS News hired me because of affirmative action. And they hired me in 1972. There were other people in the Washington Bureau in that program. Bernie Shaw, do you remember him from CNN? Yeah. Connie Chung, and I. You can figure it out, the Chinese girl, the black guy, and the blonde girl. And they gave us little tiny desks in a corridor. And we were not correspondents like everybody else. We were called reporters. And we were really apprenticed to the senior correspondents. We worked alongside the seniors. We did radio. We may be allowed every now and then to do the morning news. But we were never the primary in the beginning. And Bob kept telling me, even if they make you number 2. In the beginning, I was primary because nobody thought that the Watergate was going anywhere. But even when I was number 2, he said, stay with it because there'll be so many stories out of this, they're going to have to use you as the primary. But the point is, we were apprenticed. And this was such a good way to learn what it takes to develop a source, to learn really how to write. Television writing is very different from almost any other kind of writing because it has to be so succinct. And they brought us along, so if we really did fall on our faces, we did it on radio. And, you know, it wasn't on national television in front of the whole world. Although I did have some big embarrassing experiences with that, too. Can I take a deviation here? It was a couple of years into Watergate. And I really had a lot of stories by then. And CBS decided that we were going to cover the Senate hearings, Sam Ervin's Senate hearings, live. And because they wanted to show that CBS was an equal opportunity employer, that they actually had women, they had Connie and me, that they were going to have every single night, they'd excerpt the hearing from that day and then have a roundtable discussion with the correspondents. And I was there every night. They had different men, some nights the White House correspondent, some nights the Justice correspondent, but I was there every night to prove they had a woman. And the first time, the guys never let me talk. They argued with each other. They talked over me. If I said, "Don't you think?" they'd take it away from me. That went on for 1 week, 5 days. Monday, we come back and the bosses say, "We're getting lots of mail. The public thinks you guys are being rude. You're not letting her talk. If you don't let her talk tonight, we're going to end this. We're not going to do this anymore." Everybody loved to do that analysis stuff. So we get on the set. I am over-prepared. I've read everything. I know everything. There's nothing they can throw at me that I can't answer. The first question we had a moderator, says, "Well, folks, what's the gossip down there about John Ehrlichman?" And I hear the word gossip. And I say, "Let them do gossip. I'll answer the next question." So I'm sitting there waiting for them to answer. And they're sitting there waiting for me to talk because they've been told I have to talk. So there's dead silence that goes on. And finally, Daniel Shore steps into the breach, and he says something like, "Well, if it's gossip you want, we have a woman here." Can you believe that? Yes, he did. Live national television. Oh, my God. Everything I had learned all through the whole weekend went out of my head. I stammered. I made no sense. I forgot who I was supposed to gossip about. It was disaster. I ran upstairs, and I called home, and I said, "Daddy, write my letter of resignation. I'm mortified. I made a mess of it." He said, "You were great, you know, Dad." I said, "Daddy, you've got to be honest with me. I was terrible. And look, if you can't be honest with me, put Mother on the phone." And he said the immortal words, "Mother can't talk right now. She's too upset."
Then you knew the real story goes.
And that was Dolly.
Amazing story. And somewhere you referenced, and maybe in your book on reporting, that maybe it was that panel discussion, there'd be the named seats for everyone who was going to speak, and then your seat always said female.
That was election night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It said Maud, Wallace, Rather, Cronkite, female.
I think we go to the next slide here. I love this cover. That's very cool. But, you know, why there are still no female Dan Rathers? But I don't want to dwell just on the subject, but it's a big deal. I mean, did you understand that you were making history in a way by pioneering this space at the time? Did you have that awareness?
No.
Yeah.
And I never wanted to be Dan Rather anyway. You know, first of all, this was right in the midst of the women's revolution, Gloria Steinem and the marches. And the little group of us in Washington who wanted desperately to cover politics, and some wanted to cover the Pentagon and the White House. We just wanted to do a good job and prove that we could do the same job, with the end product would be the same. It would be just as good, if not better, and we worked so hard. And I'm jumping ahead, I don't know if you want me to, but I write in the grandmother book, this is really a jump ahead, that my daughter breastfed. And I thought, what? You're breastfeeding? None of us breastfed. None of us. because the men didn't breastfeed, and we had to show that we were just like them. We could do everything they did and do it the same way. And I don't even think that I was thinking for 1 second about climbing the ladder. We were just so grateful we were in the door and given a chance to do what we loved doing. And just, I thought I would just be that White House correspondent forever. So the idea that we thought, wow, we're in the door and we're going to go to the top the next minute, never, no.
Interesting. And, you know, being a White House reporter, it's a heady mix of power and politics and prominence and, you know, fame in a way. It's particularly, all of you got a lot of attention. Did anything ever happen to you that you are willing to talk about that would cause you to join the #MeToo campaign?
This is embarrassing, because no. I'm mortified. It never happened. I don't know. It never happened.
And it was, is it something you witnessed or were quite aware of, or no?
Yeah, well, let me say, when I say it never happened, you know, I'm of that generation, and I'm looking out here, and I see a lot of my generation here tonight. It was just absorbed. A guy, you know, decided to chase you around the desk. It was nothing. I mean, it was just the way it was. And you didn't make a big deal of it. You laughed about it with your girlfriends. It was just part of it. And, you know, they almost never caught us. They'd chase and we'd run out the door. And I don't even remember. Maybe it happened to me. I don't remember. But we did laugh about it at dinner. And there were senators who were just known for this. And their secretaries would say to the women reporters, don't go in there alone. Just don't do it. And, you know, there were certain offices you wouldn't go. It just was known, and it was absorbed. And I salute the young women today for speaking up, because our time was so completely different. And we're going to, the environment is going to completely, it's already turned around, completely already.
So, and during this era, you're chosen to, as Tom mentioned, and Tina, to moderate a major, you know, Sunday program, Face the Nation. That hasn't happened again, right? For network news, you haven't had a woman moderator.
If anybody ever asked me what's the best job I ever had, that would be it. I miss it. I love 60 Minutes, obviously. I'm holding on. But can I, this is an aside, I'll come back. I said to my boss.
I'm not going to try to produce you. You're one of the most famed story creators, so go for it.
my boss, when Morley died, I went into my boss and I said, you know what's on your mind. If I start fading in any way, either mentally or physically, I'm going to be the first one to come in here and tell you. And he looked at me and he said, no, you're not. No one ever does that. No one in the history of the world's ever done that. Pause, pause, pause. I'll tell you, he said. So that's an aside. Where were we?
So I was asking about Face the Nation and women moderators.
My best job. Yeah. We were all women. The executive producer, the producer, we were all women, and they left us alone. We completely ran the show from top to bottom. No one ever said anything. And we just had the best time, and it was serious work. It was live, which is totally different from 60 Minutes, where everything is taped. Live is very exciting. The clock ticks, and they're going on and on and on, and trying to get you not to ask a follow-up question. And it was my favorite time in my career.
So we have a 60 Minutes. I think this is 1991 when you start out there.
No, that's later.
Yeah, no, that's later, and that's not your team. So, okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is all about, you know, the stories you covered, the people you met, and I think this, you know, to me is a fascinating program here. One thing you were known for not only being relentless, but fearless and getting out there in the field. I think you're with General Odiano there in Baghdad, maybe, and you called covering the guerrillas in Rwanda the most rewarding day of your life. Talk about whatever you want to talk about on these. I think you're up in the Arctic there.
I know I look fearless. I love when people say, you were so brave. I've never, ever felt brave, ever. I come home and I look at myself in some of these situations and I say to myself, you are out of your mind. Look at me with Odiano. It's the middle one on the top. Every guy is wearing fatigues and they've got bulletproof vests and they're wearing helmets. You can't see, but I'm wearing espadrilles. I'm wearing a silk red jacket, and I'm walking around as if there's no chance of anybody being shot at. We're in a war zone. But I didn't feel fear, and I never have. It's not that I put myself there. I felt those nice guys with all those guns are going to protect me.
And in the 50 years of 60 Minutes, it says you were known for not liking the human interest story, the soft story. You wanted the tough stuff, the hard stuff.
Oh, that's not true.
Okay.
That's not true.
Because the guerrillas seem to have won you over.
No. I covered Washington. Now you're really going to know how old I am. Covered Washington for 20 years. We did the budget every year. I covered the White House for 10. Every year we did the federal budget. I mean, we did the federal budget for every year. We did arms control constantly while I was there. We covered the Soviet Union. It was pretty dry stuff. And that was it. And we weren't allowed to smile. If we smiled on a stand-up, we had to go outside and redo it without the smile. And one of the first stories I did at 60 Minutes was with a brain surgeon who had bone cancer, and he was in excruciating pain. But when he operated, he didn't have pain because, I don't know, the brain, when it concentrates completely, it can rise above it. And I loved him. I loved this man. His name was Thorvald Sundt. He was the best brain surgeon in the world, and people came to him when they had inoperative aneurysms and tumors that no one else could get to. And we did this story, and I brought it back, and I went to Don Hewitt, and I said, you're never going to run this story. He said, why? I said, because I loved him, and you can tell on every picture that I'm just crazy about this guy. And I knew they wouldn't run it, and he looked at me, and he laughed, and he said, you're at 60 Minutes. We do run stories where you're allowed to like. And I felt I was kind of born again. For the first time in my reporting career, I was going to be able to do human interest stories with people who were admirable and lovable, and I was going to be able to express that. So no, I love those stories, and I do quite a bit of them.
If we go to the next slide. So you score the first interview after the election with Donald Trump. You get the world's attention. Tell us about that. And did you know him before from?
I'd met him a couple of times. Didn't really know him. Before he gave me, I did 2 interviews with him. Before he consented to a 60 Minutes interview with me, he basically auditioned me and my boss. And we were invited to his office in Trump Tower, and we spent quite a bit of time with him. He was being stunningly charming, and I think I read this in Michael Wolff's book, that he had a habit of flattering people, and we went through that. We were lavished with praise, both I was and my boss was. He both praised me quite a bit and then kind of threatened me by bringing up the interview with Megyn Kelly and, saying, you better do a good story, you know what'll happen, kind of thing. But and in the middle of the session with him, he at his desk, and Jeff Fager and I, in walked Ivanka. In the middle, just in the middle, she walked in. And I think that happens in every single solitary meeting he ever had as a businessman, and I think as president. There's a cue that had, I mean, she walks in and he introduces her, and I couldn't figure out whether she was going to take some measure of what was going on and give him advice or what that was about. But here she just walked in the middle with a business question. And we left and got the first interview, and then he told me at the end of that interview that I would get the first interview. And he said, I'm good, and he's lived up to his word.
So you have covered Nixon?
Oh, by the way, when I met him up at his tower, he told us that he had the best office in all of New York, told us that he had the best view in all of New York.
It was huge.
He told us it was huge. He told us that he had the best executive bathroom in all of New York and took us into it. And he put his makeup on himself in front of us in his best bathroom, executive bathroom in all of New York.
Unique experience. So let's take the panoply of presidents that you've personally covered. So we have Nixon, we have Carter, we have Reagan, we have Bush 1, we've got Clinton, we've got Bush 2, we've got
Clinton. I covered the White House of Carter, Reagan, Bush 1.
Okay.
Okay.
So just if you could talk about which president has been most impressive to you and why of that.
Bush 1, because of his honorability, his kind of impish sense of humor, his integrity. I really admired him and liked him a lot. And I think he doesn't get enough credit. One-termers usually don't.
And he, was known for kind of his steady hand, knowing what he wanted. I mean, maybe that was...
Well, you have to look at the skill with which he ended the Cold War, united Germany, brought the world with him when he decided he was going to go to war. All these things he did quietly, he did modestly. When the wall came down, when the Berlin Wall came down, I was in the pool. And the pool is a group of reporters, a magazine writer, 2 newspaper writers, and a television writer, and a camera crew. And we go in and talk to the president, and then we come out and give our footage to everybody, and the print reporters write up a report of exactly what happened. And we're in there, the wall's coming down, there's a television screen there with the exuberance of what was going on in Berlin, and the president is so low-key and saying, this is a nice day, this is a good day. And I said to him, no enthusiasm. The world is going crazy. Look at the people jumping up and down, and the whole world is celebrating. I mean, what's going on with you? And he said, I don't want to boast, and I don't want to I don't want to make Gorbachev feel that we won this victory. I don't want to make him feel that we're boasting in any way.
And I do remember Barbara Bush. You weren't allowed to boast.
Yeah, right.
Right?
No, that was his mother.
Yes,
that was his mother. You're not allowed
That's right.
to boast. No, but it was a service on top of his regular presidency to the world, the way he handled himself, and it was modest, and he didn't get a lot of credit, but he deserves it.
In some ways, President Trump and President Bush were opposite in their approach on these things. Many ways?
How's about every way?
Yeah.
Yeah, completely opposite. Jimmy Carter, it was very interesting for me to cover Jimmy Carter and then cover Ronald Reagan. Because if you want to talk about opposites, that was it. Jimmy Carter was young, and he had a very young team around him, in their 30s, most of them. And everything was a crisis. Every single thing. The lights were on at the White House every night till midnight. Everything was heightened because I think partly because of age, because I saw Reagan come in his 70s and everything calmed down. So everything was heightened, and the country was kind of agitated by it too. The president really does kind of set the mood for the whole country. It's the top of the pyramid, and what he goes through and presents to us affects us. So Jimmy Carter, he had a lot of problems on his plate. He had the energy crisis, he had double-digit inflation, he had the hostages. So there was a lot there, but he didn't handle it in a calm way. And then Reagan came in, and I'm telling you, overnight, he came in with his 70-year-old attitude that this too shall pass, this is going to be fine, we're going to work it out, let's go home at 6 o'clock. No, he didn't, he went home at 6 o'clock. But the lights weren't on all night, and things in the country settled down. They just did, and he even had a huge recession in the beginning. But it wasn't as agitating to the Americans. His ratings went way down, by the way. People forget how low his ratings could get, down in the 30s.
This is Reagan.
Reagan, when he had his recession. But he even handled that with this kind of self-assurance that this will pass, that a man who's lived a long life can bring.
Do you think we'll ever see the era again, which we had under Reagan, where he and Tip O'Neill, Speaker of the House, would spend time together and laugh together and share together, and you know, they'd have their differences. Reagan had a very particular ideology. He didn't agree with him, but it was a completely different Washington in the sense that there wasn't that kind of rancor across party lines.
Correct. Right. There was, the wives lived there, which they often don't now, and there was a lot of socializing. But I do think that a president and the speaker, if he's in another party, could like each other a lot and spend time together and play golf together. I think it's possible. I mean, I think the personality of the president is a huge factor in our lives and in Washington. And I think a guy who comes in and loves politics and has a Speaker of the House who loves politics, and they can talk about the good old days, I can see that happening again, sure.
Let's touch on a few of these folks and maybe just give your top line observation of them. John McCain.
Oh, well, I just did my story on John McCain.
He's on the upper
You know,
left
he
there.
was beloved by the press corps in Washington because he was such an honest, unabashedly giving kind of politician. You didn't find him coming on the shows with the single purpose of not making news, which all the rest of them did. And he trusted. He's a trusting person. With all he's been through, he trusts people, so you like him back for that. He's a little wacky, and he has a temper, but he's basically a citizen, a really strong American citizen who cares about the country and the future deeply, deeply. I remember when he did something, we all remember. What was it? It was the Confederate flag, something in South Carolina. Is this the thing he ended up apologizing for because he twisted himself around for politics? And he later said, oh, I despise myself for having done that. But I did just interview him after his diagnosis, and he was fairly optimistic, which is a sort of window into his personality.
Yeah. What about Mark Zuckerberg, someone who's changed the way the world works?
Well,
Left hand, middle there.
I interviewed him twice. The first time he had just started, and he was so young. He was 24, but he was young. It wasn't just that he was in his early 20s. He was a kid, and he was running this company, which was already wildly successful. And he was in over his head, and he knew it. And then I interviewed him just about 3 years later, and he was a CEO. He figured it out in 3 years, was in command, and And I think if he walked into a meeting, he would force the rest of the room to look up to him.
Oh.
I'm a little baffled by what he's doing right now with Facebook, mainly because he seems to be opening a social media site for 6-year-olds. I have a 6-year-old grandchild. I'm furious. Let me leave it there. I'm just livid.
Tell me what he's doing. I think I've missed this development.
He's starting a social media site for children as young as 6. And, you know, it's addictive. And so let's start them early. I think it's outrageous.
Henry Kissinger was asked here if he tweets, and he said, I have enough trouble figuring out what I think about in the world than to read what 5,000 other people are thinking about. No, I don't, and I will never. So,
it is such a generational thing. Although that Trump does it is kind of interesting, because most of my friends my age, his age, don't. But there he is, working away at it. Even, did you read the New York Times editorial page with all the people who are thrilled with what he's done? And most of them say, like, except for the tweeting. You know, I think he's doing a good job, except for the tweeting. He told me in my interview with him that he would tweet to stay in touch with his movement, but that he would do it much less, and that he would not be, in effect, I forget his language, shooting off my mouth. And I really thought, oh my, he's become president. He's going to be president. He gets it. Man, was I wrong.
And I'm going to mention John Shin, who is on one of our trustees here. Real estate mogul right there on the top, right in the middle is her book and you interviewing her.
Oh, yeah.
So I did an interview with her and Ariana Huffington here about East-West women's leadership, and you know, she was working in a Hong Kong shirt factory, sewing, doing piecework, got herself in university, rose to the top. What do you think of this rise? We have a wonderful woman CEO here, Susan Hakaranian of Lutron Electronics, happens to be a nuclear physicist too, a new trustee. But you know, seeing women really making a huge impact in the world of business and all of that. Is that an era you thought you'd see? And any thoughts?
Well, Shin is remarkable. She is just a stunning example of a person who has so much resilience and forcefulness that she came out of nowhere. And she told me a story when I did my piece of somehow getting herself to England to go to university and not knowing a single person. She thought her English was terrific. She'd been in Hong Kong, but she was having trouble understanding anybody. She sat down on the curb. I think she was going to Oxford, but she wasn't going. She was around that university and just cried and cried, and somehow she got into the university, and just rose and rose and rose. When I did my story in Beijing, she and her husband were huge celebrities. They were running this giant real estate company, building enormous skyscraper buildings, not just tall, but they were tall and wide at the same time. Business enterprises and residential buildings. And they were blogging, and I believe tweeting, about democracy coming to China. And they were so sure that the country was opening up. And a little, I mean, to me, they were outspoken, a little bit critical of the regime, and I was surprised that they could go out and speak their minds about how democracy had to come to that country and not be afraid. And boom, that was shut down real fast. And as I hear, Shin is basically living here because the country is shut down. And I've gone to China reporting over the years. And really, every single time I go, it's a different situation. They've either clamped down or they're loosening up or they're in the process of moving in the other direction. And ever since 1984, it just seems to go back and forth, and it's very confusing.
So we're going to go to becoming grandma, but before we do that, what other world leaders, who's had the biggest impact on you? When did you feel, I am talking to history? This is...
I don't think I've ever felt I was talking to history. That's one of the problems. You know, we live in a time when there aren't great men. Women haven't had much of a chance. I'll tell you about Margaret Thatcher in a minute. But we just don't have great leaders that I at least have been in the room with and just looked up to and said, wow, what an extraordinary human being. I mean, I'm talking about heads of state. Margaret Thatcher is one of the smartest people I ever interviewed. I'm not saying that I thought I was seeing history, but she was a force. I'm not intimidated, almost ever, and she intimidated me, and she could do it. She could do it, and wow.
Just with
I
her
admire
stare.
her. Just with her voice, actually.
Yeah.
You knew her, Harry, right?
I do, in my class.
Yeah.
Did she intimidate you?
Everybody intimidates me.
Sir Harold Evans.
Margaret Thatcher had a lot to do with Margaret Thatcher. Good and bad. I mean, I could talk a long time about it, but it's so fascinating listening to you. Please continue.
Yeah. So we're going to come to all of you in just a moment. We're just going to now kind of end
Do
this.
Grandma?
We're going to talk about Grandma. I'm going to quote the beginning of your book, if any of you have not read this. She actually reads the Audible version. Do we have Audible fans out there? I love the, because I read too much, and you do a great job reading it.
Thank you.
And just the introduction alone is really interesting. But you start and you say, you really are exhilarated, clearly, even though you approach grandparenting like an investigative reporter in a way. But over the river and through the woods, becoming a grandmother turns the page, line by line, you are rewritten, you are tilted off your old center, spun onto new turf, and reach the depth of pure loving you have never felt before. And you said it exhilarated you with a new purpose, and said we're entering the era of the grandmother.
Well, of course, I wrote that when I knew Hillary was going to be president of the United States. But I do think women are coming into power slowly. I can't believe it's taken us so long. I said I came into the workplace in 1972 when affirmative action was passed. And the idea in 1972 was that women had arrived, we're on the path, where it's just going to be another 10 years. And we haven't had our Margaret Thatcher yet. But I do feel that we're moving up to a tipping point. And we're just slowly inching our way up. And maybe this is the right way to do it because we're getting there because of merit. We're not getting there because we're jumping lines. And maybe it's just going to happen naturally. And instead of, meteors, we're going to slowly reach power in the country and at these companies in a natural way.
So now
That's a hope.
Have you look in a crystal ball. By when will we have had a woman president? I know, just taking a guess. And what are some names that come to mind of women you see who might be that woman?
Well, obviously, I thought we were going to have a woman president by now. Wrote a whole book around that concept in a way. It could happen in the next election. We don't know who the candidates are going to be. We don't know if Trump will run again. We don't know if the Democrats will have a woman or the Republicans will have a woman. We don't know who they are. At this stage, Bill Clinton, no one had heard of him. Certainly no one had heard of Obama. I mean, when I say Clinton, no one was thinking of him as a presidential candidate. So there are people out there that we were not imagining. So I don't know.
In the book, you say getting old breaks the glass ceiling, and you talk about Janet Yellen being 69, Nancy Pelosi being 75, Elizabeth Warren being 66.
Yeah. That's because, you know, what I wrote in there, and it came to me from a girlfriend, is that when women get older, men are not intimidated by us because the sex junk goes away.
Right.
And when you're younger, it's just in the room. It just is. Let's face it, we're animals, and the attraction is there between a man and a young woman. And the minute we can no longer produce, while we may miss that, you know, hey, he didn't flirt with me today. We all can do our jobs more easily because that junk is out of the way. And I do think that men, and maybe women, can accept an older woman in a position of authority. That's why I thought Hillary being a grandmother, I always thought this, that would be an advantage to her, but she chose not to use it. She chose not to say at every turn, I'm a grandmother, which I think could have. I actually went to a focus group, and I was allowed to ask some questions in this focus group about her being a grandmother. They were all Republicans. They hated her and despised her. They told me that she was crooked and all the things. I said, but do you think that her being a grandmother will soften her image and help her? And a lot of the Republicans said they thought it might help.
So in the book you said you were warned by many people not to write this book, and they said you would be labeled as an LOL, which you said has a second meaning, not just laughing out loud.
LOL. Doctors use this in their notes. LOL, little old lady. Yeah, and I was told that it would hurt my career if I labeled myself as a grandmother. I had a different view, and I still have a different view, but, you know, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. How many of you are grandparents? Come on, I know of you in here.
Yeah.
Are they going to ask questions?
Yes, they're going to ask
Can
questions
I tell
now.
you one story
Yes.
before?
You
about
can,
being-
you can.
This is my final thing before I take your questions. But the day that the paperback version of Becoming Grandmother came out, I was in a coffee shop on the East Side, and I walked out, and there was this man, hunched over, wisps of white hair, a little tremor, pushing a stroller, actually a carriage. And a little boy was in it, and he was acting up. And this man was so patient with this little kid. So I blurted out, "Grandpa." And he looked at me and he said, "Daddy." And I thought, welcome to New York.
Interesting.
True story. All right.
Okay, we're going to go to all of you.
This side's going to ask me about being a grandmother. That side's going to ask me about going to China.
And Cynthia Polsky, we'd love to start with you.
This has been wonderful. Your stories are wonderful. I wonder if you've had a chance to interview Angela Merkel, the outstanding leader of the Western world right now, who happens to be a woman.
I have tried so hard to interview Angela Merkel. She just doesn't do interviews.
Is that right?
She barely gives interviews to the German press, and I don't know that she's ever sat down for the kind of interview we do. We've asked a million times. She just doesn't do interviews.
Do you think that's a technique of governing for her?
Certainly is part of her MO. It certainly is the way she's gone on for how many terms now? And she gets away with it.
This is her fourth.
She gets away with it.
And the Obamas? Did you interview
I
either of the Obamas?
I only interviewed him about Biden. So I never really sat knee to knee with him. But, you know, when I interviewed him about Biden, the idea, it was so silly. The idea was I was supposed to bump into him in the hallway outside the Oval Office. Come on. You know, we have we get cameras and lights all over the place. So we're standing there, and I'm asking him about Biden. And the thing that struck me, and it struck me with a wallop, was how calm he was. And people talked about the Zen master and all of that. I'd read about it. But I could actually feel it because most people have kind of an engine. We all do. You know, we all have our energy going. And he was placid, placid, placid. And it really struck me, really struck me.
Who else is...
That would be, I think, an interesting element of leadership when everybody else has got their engine going and he's just...
Very interesting. Who else wants to jump in? You have one in the back there.
Could you talk about the interview you had with Nicolas Sarkozy? And then after that, talk about Uncle Walter.
Oh, okay. I did an interview with the then president of France, Sarkozy, and I'll tell you the truth, he was a bully. He bullied his staff in front of us. He bullied me. He was just kind of a pompous, difficult man. In the middle of our time with him, we spent about a week following him around. We went to Bulgaria with him. His first wife left him. And it was all anybody was talking about. And the reporters I met over there said, you mustn't ask him about that. In France, we don't ask personal questions of our leaders. You mustn't ask. Well, I'm not a French reporter. And the truth is, it was the only thing anybody in all of France was talking about, in fact, all of Europe. So I asked it. And he called me a vulgar name, threw off his microphone, and stormed out. And of course, we ran the whole thing. That was my time with Sarkozy. It became
Has anyone else walked out on you?
Yeah, I've had a couple, but that one was quite dramatic. In fact, I wasn't even sure we had much of a story. And then he did that, and I turned to my producer. I said, we have a story. So that was kind of silly of him. He made a mistake. He should not have done that. He just could have ridden it out. He could have said to me, we don't talk about that in this country. It's not an appropriate question. He could have put me down big time. He was very emotional. And I thought, how can you be that emotional? You know, they always talk about women having wild emotions. I've met so many men who can't control their emotions.
Interesting. So,
and
Uncle
Walter Cronkite, you talk about a leader. He was the kind of leader of a news organization. He could have been the leader of any, where everybody wanted to do a great job so that he would praise you. You know, you were working for his pat on the back. And he had total integrity, as you all saw, and a great sense of humor, kind of a ribald sense of humor. You would never call him uncle if you heard one of his jokes. He told me one, I'll just say it this way. He told me a joke about proctology. I'm not going to go any further, although he did. But he was a serious journalist, obviously.
Yeah. And we have one here. We have a bunch that have come in online, so I've got a whole list here.
Can you offer any thoughts about the training that you and others at 60 Minutes get concerning questions you should ask, how to form a question, and when to ask a question?
You know, by the time we get to 60 Minutes, if we haven't learned that, we won't be there. So we don't get any training. And that's why I mentioned the apprentice system that I went through, that kids today don't get the opportunity to do. There aren't apprentice systems in journalism anymore. You know, that you just have to put in your 10,000 hours and learn how to do a proper interview. And after 10,000 hours, they hire you at 60 Minutes.
That kind of dovetails.
No training, and no one tells you what to ask, and no one tells you what not to ask.
That dovetails with a question from Charles on Twitter, who says, in this era of social digital media, how is the reporter-centered investigative journalism, such as 60 Minutes, coping with the changing landscape where almost anyone can slap on a microphone, attach it to a smartphone, and call themselves a reporter?
Yeah. Well, it's frankly disconcerting that seems to be the direction that news reporting is going. I find it disconcerting, but you know, you can't stop technology. You just can't. It's a wave. You know, it's like putting your hand up in a tsunami. You just can't stop it. And I keep thinking that the internet will get a policeman. I thought that when it really started, almost at the beginning, and
In
it
some
needs
countries
a
it
policeman.
does.
I don't mean it needs. I mean a traffic cop, or I don't know, somebody who just says, or maybe it's a good housekeeping seal of approval. You know, somebody's going to say, this is a legitimate site, and these people aren't, and you know, you can read these people over here if you want, but we're going to put a label on it so you know, I don't know. It's out of control. I worry about the future of journalism, and I think we all do. And I keep thinking that what I do won't be done.
Interesting. Do you worry about the future, the world we're handing your grand?
Yes, I
Beautiful.
worry about the world I'm handing my grandchildren every single day.
What part do you worry about?
Well, right now I'm focused on social media and the addiction that young people have with their phones. And I care about it deeply. I don't know why. I've been screaming, boring my friends with this, that we have to find. My poor daughter, she keeps telling me her kids are too young to worry about it. And I say, well, you have to. Why can't mothers get together? The problem, did you read the story in, I think, the Times, about this 12-year-old boy and his parents decided he wasn't going to get a smartphone. And he lost all his friends because he didn't know where the party was and he didn't know what anyone was talking about. That's how they communicate. So you have to let them have it. It's not as if you can say to them, no. But I think if all the parents got together and put some limits on, it would, I don't know. There's no solution. I'm just very frustrated by it.
In your book, you talk about your generation, which wanted to change the world in the 60s and all that that represented. Are you a little surprised that we haven't left things in better shape?
I guess my mind is focused on leadership and how important the direction we take. Well, there's two things. One is leadership and how important it is that the people at the top guide us. Sometimes you feel helpless when you're driven in one direction. So I'm not sure I relate to what we did as a generation. I'm not sure I relate to that. The other force in our lives that is changing us so completely is technology. And that just moves forward at such a rapid pace. We don't adjust to it. We can't so quickly. Our system of government doesn't adjust to it. We have the same constitution we had in 1776, and everything's changed. And we don't adjust the way we elect people, and everything's changed. We don't adjust really the way presidents sit in the Oval Office and make their decisions and release executive orders and nominate judges and so forth. Nothing changes with the way they communicate with us, which is completely different. So technology is hitting us in the face every day with something new and hard to handle. These are the things I worry about for my grandchildren. I worry about how they're going to make friends when they're sitting home on their phones all day. How they're going to meet a guy. How they're going to read. I mean, the brain gets wired in a certain way when we learn to read. And when we do read, how do these machines wire us? We don't even know. I don't know.
It's true.
I do stay up at night worrying about these things.
Yeah. You wanted to jump in? And then we'll get you in the back, yeah.
Oprah question.
My question was, do you think Oprah should run and will run?
You do know that I've had my opinion surgically removed, right? I don't know. I don't know if she's going to run. You know, she is at 60 Minutes, but she's never in the office. So I can't go next door and say, are you really going to run? I haven't seen her. So I know what you know.
And in the back there.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about the elephant in the room. But the question is, what do you think about fake news? I mean, there's so many attacks on reporters and networks at this time of our lives, and you almost don't know what's the truth anymore. As a reporter, can you give us some of your insight towards that?
And can we hold, because there was a question right next to you, so you can ask yours too.
We're
No?
together.
Okay, you're together. Okay, got it.
I was brave enough to ask the question.
That's a perfect question. It's hard to answer, but it's obviously, as you say, the elephant in the room. It's so painful. It is so painful because every time there's a poll, it shows you that the trust for us goes down a notch. It's way down. People do not admire reporters at all. Now, I want to say that I'm not sure they ever really did. I think we had a golden age around Watergate, actually after Watergate, because during Watergate we were hammered in a similar way. But it is particularly scary. It is, no question, detrimental to our society and our system of government to have the press, the fourth estate, seen by the founding fathers as a necessary force to hold democracy together, to see us disparaged and discredited with a very, I think, successful campaign. So it's another thing I worry about, and you all should worry about, in terms of the future of our country. You know, the way our democracy was set up, we by design, we're the cleansing agent. We were meant to poke around and get the secrets and spill them. We were meant to do that so that the system could free itself of corruption and of nasty forces within our government. And if the public doesn't believe us and is not behind us, that becomes pretty difficult to do. And especially if we're now going to start being afraid of libel suits against us and being gagged and hauled into courts, it's all terrifying to me.
Do you think
and I wish I were more optimistic. I'm sorry.
So the president's going to give an award for the worst news. Does this help or hurt?
Oh, it doesn't. How can it help? It's just so destructive. I asked him about this when I was in his office. I didn't ask him I did mention it in our interview, but I said to him, he was attacking the press with my boss and me sitting there, no one else in the room, and he's attacking the press. And I said, you know, that gets so tired. Why do you keep doing it? It's boring. That's what I said. And he said, I'll tell you why I do it. I'm getting out in front of you because I know you're going to be nasty to me, and I'm getting in front of you so no one believes you. He said that. Wow. So it's a design, it's a purpose. He knows what he's doing. And he's succeeding. That's the painful part.
I think right here.
Since you basically have a front row seat over so many decades watching the world, and when you're talking technology, I have a child in high school, and events have happened and unfolded, and that make me realize, and now that I'm sitting here listening to you speak, I'm wondering, do you believe, you know, at a very young age, all these children now have events and get to watch things happening around the world, a lot of hatred, and a lot of things that I believe myself in my 50s, we were not receiving news and as footage and films that just show such violence and and hatred. And when I'm wondering now that I'm now hearing of events that are happening at a young age, I do believe tolerance is down. And so I'm wondering, actually, it'd be interesting, do you believe today, you know, you've seen so many things, that the world is, that we're more exposed to things that are going on because of, you know, media can get, and their outlets that we can get it at so much faster? Or is it just we're getting it faster, or is there more things going on in the world?
Both.
Both.
We're getting it infinitely faster, and it's being accessed from everywhere. From everywhere. I mean, the internet is everywhere, and social media is everywhere. And children are getting bombarded. We're getting bombarded. You can see how it would be hard to know who to believe if you're sitting on your phone all day long watching it, even without anybody attacking. I mean, it's come on us so fast, this the communications technological revolution has come on us so fast. Nobody can really cope with it. Nobody. I can remember, of course we all can remember, when it was just television everybody had to cope with. And they were saying television was going to dumb us down. Remember that? Now maybe it did, I don't know. But we are so far away from there. It happened like that we moved from 3 networks where everybody in the country watched the same thing at the same time, where we all began to dress alike and look alike and talk alike and laugh at the same jokes because we watched the same TV shows, to now where there are 1,000 outlets, probably 100,000 outlets to watch and listen to. And it's just beyond a person to be able to handle. We're not built for that.
What's your morning news routine? How do you learn about the world each morning?
Well, I have my television set on when I get dressed, and then I read the newspaper, old-fashioned
Which
paper.
newspapers?
Well, I start with the Times. My second is the Washington Post. My third is the Wall Street Journal. And my fourth is the Post, and then I go to work.
And no Google News, Drudge, blogs?
Not really. I'm beeped a lot, and so I'll look at whatever is beeped at me, but no, no.
So we had one last question over here, yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to say yes, we're very much enjoying your talk.
Even though I'm down and dark and...
I had a question about this, because you were around during the height of the women's movement. You talked a little bit about that. What was it like in terms of the women during the movement? Like, we're in broadcast news. Were you and, say, Connie, friends, competitive? Did the men try to pit you guys against each other? I mean, can you talk about that?
Sure.
That would be great.
I'd love to talk about that, actually. There were so few of us that we actually clung together. And when I was in Washington in the early 70s, a group of us, maybe all of us, there was a group of us who were spending so much time with men that we formed a lunch group. And we met once a month religiously. No one ever missed this lunch. Just so that we could have girl talk, to be frank. We said we weren't going to talk. Everybody in this group was a reporter, so we were all covering the same stories. We just needed to have the, I guess when you're in a somewhat hostile, and I don't mean hostile in the sense we hear it today, but foreign. You're the only female, and it's all males. You're on alert. You can't even help it. Your body's just on alert. And we just needed to have that hour and a half once a month to relax and talk about silly things. Silly things like, who's your butcher? Or, oh, I like that nail polish, that kind of thing. And we met, I lived in Washington for 20 years. We met once a month for 20 years. So we clung to each other. Connie and I were good friends, and we're still good friends. And there were very few of us.
Who were some of the others in that core group?
Well, they were radio a lot. Cokie Roberts.
Sure.
And Linda Wertheimer. Well, this was a pollster. Dottie Lynch was a pollster.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know Dottie? Did you know Dottie? No. No, you didn't?
But I worked when I started at NPR,
Linda Wertheimer.
Yeah. You were my role model.
Caddy, please say something. Caddy Martin.
To Cynthia's question about Merkel, I'm in the middle of writing the first American biography of Angela Merkel, and I just spent the last 3 months in Berlin following her around.
Did she
And
give you
you're
an
quite
interview?
right. She's given me access, but not a sit down. And in fact, her authorized German biographer has not. In fact, he's just given up, which is fine good news for me. But I just wanted to say, picking up on the question about Oprah too, that it's a measure of what a mature democracy Germany is, that somebody as assertively and deliberately unglamorous, uncharismatic, and absolutely committed, to say nothing of brilliant, she's like Thatcher, she's a physicist by training, that she would be elected 4 times over, and that we're talking about Oprah, and the fact is that Angela Merkel could not get elected dog catcher in this country because she does not give a damn about her appearance, which is
but that's
obvious.
our system. And they have a parliamentary system, and we don't, and maybe we should.
But
Maybe
Germany,
we've come to that point where we just have to.
But also, Germany has never even had a queen uniquely in Europe. So she is a phenomenon. And part of her secret is that she doesn't call attention to the fact that she's a woman. I've watched her go clothes shopping. She buys 6 pair of the same black pants and 6 pair of the same moderately priced black flats, and then her tailor sends her 18 different little blazers in various colors.
All the same.
She has absolutely no feminine vanity, but she's very womanly if you get close to her.
Grandmotherly, womanly.
Not grandmotherly.
No.
No.
I know she doesn't have children, but I mean,
she
she
made
looks
a decision
grandmotherly.
not to have children because she has committed.
But can I tell you something about Margaret Thatcher? She was very vain.
Yes.
And she
very glamorous.
Very glamorous.
Yeah.
Extremely glamorous. People don't realize that.
When she was on the tank.
Very seductive.
Little shift on the scarf on the top of the tank.
Those clothes, she always wore jackets with a V-neck, and they were very sexy. She was sexy. So, you know, but you're
Very
right about our
interesting.
country. The system is not appropriate.
Well, Cynthia, another amazing President's Forum. Lesley, we're so honored to have you here.
Josette.
Your life, it's
I'm
so
gonna interview
talking about
you
being
next.
intimidating. To do this, I do want to point out that the first woman president of Asia Society, Vishaka Desai, is here with us. Yes. Proud and honored to follow in your footsteps, Vishaka. But thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming out on a winter night. And if any of you come up to say hello to Lesley, be careful. She's broken her right hand. Don't grab it.
Right. I shake with my left.
Okay. So thank you. And thank you.
It was
Wonderful.
so fun.